Hello, this is The Power of Women. We're on chapter 4, The Liberated Woman. God must have been fully aware of what Eve was capable of, especially as she had stolen Adam's heart from him, and Adam had now given his loyalty to her. It must have broken his heart to see how easily Adam betrayed him. God only knew what she was going to do next, for he seemed to pounce on her immediately with his judgment, implementing the sentence before she had the chance to do any more damage. Genesis 3 verse 16 says, "Unto the woman," this is what God said, "I will greatly multiply your sorrow and your conception." Don't you think it's an amazing thing to note that animals come on heat once and in some cases twice per year? I've owned female animals, and watching their behaviour at these times have been amazed to see that they are just as alert and active as normal, but not so with the human race. I can remember as a young girl my own experience being very painful and arduous. As the hormones being produced began to form my breasts, I became very conscious and aware of myself. The slightest touch or accidental knot would cause me such pain I would feel sick. I was constantly folding my arms as a barrier. For months before I began my monthly cycle for the first time, I felt unwell. My stomach was bloated, my thighs and pelvis ached so badly that sometimes I could hardly walk and had to lie in bed with a hot water bottle to relieve me. When I did start to bleed, I thought the pit of my stomach was going to fall out of me every time I went to the bathroom. I had it comparatively easy. Some girls at my school actually fainted with the pain and had to be sent home. This experience didn't happen once or twice a year like it does with animals. It actually happens every 4 weeks. That's 13 times a year for approximately 40 years. This is some curse, and such a consistent curse that it should have been enough to slow anybody down. When my animals were pregnant, I was not aware of any changes in their behaviour due to their condition, only the fact that their girth had become bigger. Pregnancy didn't seem to cause them any discomfort. Not so with the human race. Pregnancy is a real ordeal. Okay, some women say they have great pregnancies, but in the majority of cases, the opposite is true. My own sister-in-law had to be admitted to hospital and put on drips for a few weeks at the beginning of each pregnancy because she was unable to keep down either food or liquid. Another woman I know personally actually lost weight rather than gaining it, and her life was always at risk. It's also hard to get to grip on life emotionally. I didn't really know what was going on inside my head or body and would cry for no apparent reason. I would react, fly off the handle, shout without provocation, and was extremely unreasonable. My poor husband, Morris, felt he was living with a time bomb most of the time, not knowing what I would do or say at any given moment. I don't honestly know how people without God cope with the things they go through in life. There's also a major change in the body when this process of reproduction is reversed and we experience the menopause. This can cause dramatic problems such as hot flushes, headaches, irrational behaviour, and makes up for the loss of sexual appetite in quite a number of women. The second part of the curse was, "In sorrow you shall bring forth children." I've also been present when animals were giving birth. My dog lay down and knew when her time was upon her. She found a cosy little space and watched her own little young being born. When they emerged in a little sack of fluid from her body, she nicked the sack with her teeth and licked the newborn puppy dry. And in doing so, she massaged and cleaned out its orifices. One dog had a litter of 11 puppies and did the same thing with each pup without any apparent pain. As for my cat, well, I padded a box out for her to lie in, but each time a kitten emerged, she'd jump onto my knee for a caress as though she had done something splendid, and I would have to put her back into the box to either bear another kitten or look after those she already had. She seemed happy, content, and pain-free. I find it quite amazing that animals can walk and feed almost immediately after birth. Having no hands, only paws, my animals were unable to nurse their young, yet each baby found the mother's teats and suckled without her helping them. Although they swayed and stumbled, they were mobile enough immediately, and within a few days were running around playing together. Childbearing is traumatic for the human body. In the West, we take it for granted because we have well-equipped hospitals, but in many countries of the world, women die when they experience complications, as they are deprived of medical assistance due to either lack of funds or lack of facilities. In the old days, when women had complications and were in difficulty giving birth, in order to save the life of at least one of them, the doctors would have to break open the mother's pelvic bone to release the child. Thus the mother would lose her life, but the child would be saved. We're also extremely different to animals in the fact that our babies are totally dependent upon us when they are born. Indeed, most can't walk until around 1 year old, and they can't feed or look after themselves properly until they're into their teens. It's a long haul and energy sapping on the part of a parent. Birds fly away after a few weeks or months of caring for their young, but we're responsible for and tied to our children for approximately 16 years. The third part of the curse, and your desire shall be towards your husband. I heard somebody say once that if it were left to the men to have children, then the human race would have died out long ago. Well, I think the same could have been said about women, but for the fact that this clause is part of the curse. God said that no matter what pain she went through, her desire for a sexual relationship with a husband would always return. This is the fourth part of the curse, and he shall rule over you. Relationship sounds more like teamwork to me. I'm certain when God gave Eve to Adam, it was so they could have a perfect relationship where they were both in complete unity and harmony, working together and fulfilling each other's needs. Domination is completely different. Domination says one has power and the other has to submit to that authority. Genesis 1, 27-28. And God created man in his own image. In the image of God created he him. Male and female created he them. And God blessed them and said unto them, Be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the fowl of the air, and over every living thing that moveth upon the earth. This was God's instruction to both Adam and Eve. They were to be the lords of all living things that God had made. But God never told Adam to subdue Eve when he presented her to him. She was him, his other part, his mate. They were one. But once the lines of communication were broken with God, Adam found that the communication which he had once experienced with his wife was also severed. He was now on a different footing with her. She was no longer on the same level. She had turned him from God. From now on, she was always the potential enemy. At any given moment, she could come between him and his maker, for her emotional power over him was too great. She needed to be subdued. Although Adam had stated that a man would leave his father and his mother to cleave unto his wife, so that they could develop that sacred, intimate relationship, Jesus said in Luke 14:26, If any man come to me and hate not his father and mother and wife and children and brethren and sisters, yes, and his own life also, he cannot be my disciple. And in verse 33 he says, So likewise, whoever he be of you that forsaketh not all that he has, he cannot be my disciple. This is serious. Jesus is saying that if you want your lines of communication open to God, then nobody should get in between. not even your nearest and dearest. Is Jesus trying to break up families? Not at all. That is not what Jesus is saying. But if it comes to the point where you have to choose, then you must be willing to forsake all for God. I was listening to some sermons of Morris's speaking on sexual conflict at a men's seminar some time ago, and he stated that men and women look for different things when seeking a partner in the opposite sex. Men look for a pretty face and shapely figure, whereas a woman looked for something like a good character. Well, let me burst your little bubble, men. Times have changed. Once upon a time, I agree, a woman looked for this from a man because she was unable to support herself, and marriage was her only option for finding physical fulfillment and satisfaction. But things changed dramatically during the last century. After the Second World War, women decided that they didn't want to go back to being ordinary housewives, as they had been put to service and had experienced self-respect and self-worth working in the ammunition factories. They now wanted the right to vote and vigorously fought for their own independence. They found their voice and spoke out, staged demonstrations, caused riots, and won their freedom, which allowed them a say in how the country was run. Since then, they have fought in the world of commerce for equal opportunities, equal rights, equal pay, and much more. Many women now bring a higher salary into the home than their men. Hence the need for house husbands rather than housewives, because the men stay at home looking after the house and children whilst their wives fulfill their role as breadwinners. Pop music played a major role to liberate women sexually during the 60s with the fashionable preaching of promiscuous sex in songs. With the introduction of television, vocal and music talent was not enough. Now pop icons had to have the image, which in many cases was more striking than the sound waves. This music indoctrinated the younger generation into believing that they were being ridiculously Victorian by sticking to the moral codes and standards of the older generation. It became important to do your own thing and break free from tradition, even if it meant becoming perverted or irresponsible. Well, things have really progressed now. It's possible to have an almost pain-free delivery of your baby. All you have to do is book a date to have a cesarean section operation, and the surgeons will just give you an anaesthetic, cut you open, take the baby out, stitch you back up again. Voila! You may be sore for a few weeks, but none of that demoralising labour, nor the terrible pain when the pelvic bones come out of joint and the uterus is stretched and torn to allow your issue to emerge. None of the toil and sweat of expelling something from your body which just won't budge of its own accord. Many celebrities now take this option as it's convenient and they can fit it into their schedules. The menopause has caused women so many problems throughout the ages that medical science, looking for a solution, have come up with HRT, hormone replacement treatment. This treatment is intended to put back into the body the hormone which stops being produced once the menstruation years have ended, so that women can get on with their lives. There are side effects to this treatment, of course, such as the fact that it increases the risk of cancer. It can't safely be continued for more than 10 years, and in some cases it's actually killed women. And even if it does work for you, all it actually does is prolong the inevitable, and you get all the symptoms of the menopause at a later date. Up to now, medical science has not been able to cheat God. Contraception was promoted and became more easily accessible to both married and unmarried women. At one time, it was only the very self-assured man who could walk into a chemist shop and ask for condoms. But I can remember 40 years ago when at my first place of employment, everyone would talk about the married slut in the factory's packing room who was having an affair with one of the employees and made sure her handbag was always well equipped with condoms. In the office where I worked, we looked down on such immoral behaviour. But even here, one of the married clerical staff made the air blue with the shocking filth which came out of her mouth. And she would seductively tantalise the sales reps at every opportunity, groping them like an animal on heat. Made me ashamed to think she was female. But even after women go through all the pain of natural childbirth, and they vow that they will never have any more children, instead of refusing intercourse with men, they keep coming back for more, because God has destined that all their desire would return, and they would be on the same old treadmill. His intention was to keep women occupied with looking after the home and children, to keep her out of mischief. But no worries. The pill or condoms can prevent contraception. If that fails, for those of us fortunate enough to live in the West, we can demand an abortion. With no feelings of guilt about hacking to bits the child inside the womb so that piece by piece it can be sucked out with a vacuum cleaner, we are assured that this is just an operation to remove an unwanted fetus rather than murder. If we want to be totally free and live wildly, then we can actually request to be sterilised. Yeah, we can live life to the full and give way to our reprobate mind, but be warned. If we cheat God out of his curse now, he'll get us back later. Now, with abortion being made available on demand, schools are obliged to give their students lessons on birth controls from a very young age and provide them with contraceptives to avoid unwanted pregnancies at school. Young boys are being issued with plastic cards with which to access condoms free of charge from machines. Any student who finds herself pregnant need not worry. She will be protected from parents ever becoming aware of what she has been doing, because the school will take care of the situation. Promiscuity is flaunted as being normal practice in the soap operas, and those watching feel second class if they're not following the fashionable trends. In fact, they actually feel deprived if they think that they are not indulging what everybody else is doing. Sex is widely promoted and used to sell everything from baked beans to cars on our television screens. And even if we're strong enough to get rid of the influence that televisions, newspapers and magazines bring to our homes, every day the billboard hoardings scream their suggestive, immoral and provocative advertisements at us. Everything seems to have gone sex mad and is completely out of control. From the things I've read throughout the Bible, I've concluded that a liberated woman knows no conscience. Deuteronomy 22 verse 5 says, "The woman shall not wear that which pertains unto a man, neither shall a man put on a woman's garments. For all that do so are abomination unto the Lord your God." And in Romans 1 verse 26 and 27, it says, "For this cause God gave them up to their vile affections, for even their women did change the natural use into that which is against nature. And likewise also the men, leaving the natural use of the woman, burned in their lust one toward another, men with men." In both these readings, women are mentioned first. God puts things in order, and if the Bible mentions women first, then it means that they have the greater problem in this area and are liable to fall for the temptation more easily than men. This is probably the reason why God cursed Eve and all subsequent women so severely. He knew where their imaginations would take them. The streets today are full of schoolgirls and young women wearing provocative clothing, tiny skirts, skin-tight, low-hip trousers, midriff revealing, low-necked and backless tops or dresses, no matter what the weather's like. I never see men walking around revealing their flesh in the same way. It always seems to be the women who are doing the enticing. The beaches are even more of a problem, as except for a tiny triangle somewhere below the waist, nothing else of the female form is left to the imagination. The churches are no different. Whatever is being worn on the high street is brought into the church buildings. When will women wake up and realise that God designed us to be attractive to men? Why do we persist in displaying goods in the shop window that aren't for sale? And we wonder why there is rape and abuse. We're all too often the cause of offence by not understanding what our manner of dress stirs up in the hearts of normal, ordinary men. As we are ministers, my husband and I often sit either on the platforms or front rows of churches, so we get a good view of all the preliminaries before we share. I must confess that all too often we are distracted by those in the worship group who, instead of focusing our attention on God, draw our attention away from Him to themselves. It does not honour God for young women to hold or stand in front of microphones dressed in clothing that hugs the shape or reveals the flesh. And it's 10 times worse when they dance or sway to the music, for this is extremely sensual and provocative. Sometimes I squirm in my seat, knowing the effect it must be having on my husband and all the men in the church who have come to the house of God. Our televisions, and especially the God channel, have made us insensitive to the emotions that these worldly performances evoke. They are very seductive. Ministry should never be presented as entertainment. This is a prime example of the way the whore has infiltrated the Church of God. I was also at fault as a young woman, even though I was in ministry. I would wear low tops exposing my cleavage, figure-hugging dresses flaunting my curves, and tiny skirts showing off my slim legs. I enjoyed the admiring, drooling looks from men at work, yet complained if married men at church stared, saying that they should have a pure heart. Let me tell you now, this dress code did not glorify or honour God. No, it actually drew attention away from God and glorified me, to my shame. And God had to push me off my pedestal. The first few chapters of Proverbs is full of instruction and wise counsel, which King David is passing on to his son in preparation for when he takes over the throne and rules his people. David has lived and learned. His own soul has yearned and panted after God, and he's kept his commandments with his whole heart. So now he passes on his personal revelation concerning the deception of strange women. It's a pity Solomon listened to it, wrote it down, but didn't adhere to it, for he would have saved himself much heartache and sorrow. Proverbs 2 verse 16 to 19. To deliver you from the strange woman, even from the stranger which flatters with her words, which forsakes the guide of her youth and forgets the covenant of her God. For her house inclines unto death, and her paths unto death. None that go unto her return again, neither take they hold of the paths of life. And Proverbs 5, verses 3 to 15. For the lips of a strange woman drop as a honeycomb, and her mouth is smoother than oil, but her end is bitter as wormwood, sharp as a two-edged sword. Her feet go down to death, her steps take hold on hell, lest you should ponder the path of her life. Her ways are immovable, that you cannot know them. Hear me now, therefore, O you children, and depart not from the words of my mouth. Remove your way far from her, and come not nigh the door of her house, lest you give your honour unto others, and your years unto the cruel, lest strangers be filled with your wealth, and your labour be in the house of a stranger, and you mourn at the last, when your flesh and your body are consumed, and say, how have I hated instruction, and my heart despised reproof, and have not obeyed the voice of my teachers, or inclined my ear to them that instructed me. And here's more from Proverbs 6, verse 20 to 35. My son, keep your father's commandments, and forsake not the law of your mother. Bind them continually upon your heart, and tie them about your neck. When you go, it shall lead you. When you sleep, it shall keep you. When you wake, it shall talk with you. For the commandment is a lamp, and the law is light, and reproofs of instruction are the way of life, to keep you from the evil woman, from the flattery of the tongue of a strange woman. Lust not after her beauty in your heart, neither let her take you with her eyelids. For by means of a whorish woman a man is brought to a piece of bread, and the adulteress will hunt for the precious life. Can a man take fire in his bosom, and his clothes not be burned? Can one go upon hot coals, and his feet not be burned? So he that goes in to his neighbour's wife, whosoever touches her shall not be innocent. Men do not despise a thief, if he steal to satisfy his soul when he is hungry. But if he be found, he shall restore sevenfold. He shall give all the substance of his house. But whosoever commits adultery with a woman lacks understanding. He that does it destroys his own soul. A wound and dishonour shall he get, and his reproach shall not be wiped away. For jealousy is the rage of a man. Therefore he will not spare in the day of vengeance. He will not regard any ransom, neither will he rest content, though you give many gifts. God made for Adam what he would have wished for himself. The woman had come out of Adam, so Adam loved her as an extension of himself. God chose a man, Abraham, and out of his covenant with Abram and through circumcision, God produced unto himself a peculiar people who would become his bride. This is Ezekiel 16, verses 6 to 14. And when I passed by you and saw you polluted in your blood, this is what God's saying of Israel, I said unto you, when you were in your blood, live. Yes, I said unto you, when you were in your blood, live. I've caused you to multiply as the bud of the field, and you've increased and grown great, and you are come to excellent ornaments. Your breasts are fashioned, and your hair is grown, whereas you are naked and bare. Now, when I passed by you and looked upon you, behold, your time was the time of love. And I spread my skirt over you, and covered your nakedness. Yes, I swore unto you, and entered into a covenant with you, said the Lord God, and you became mine. Then washed I you with water. Yes, I thoroughly washed away your blood from you, and I anointed you with oil. I clothed you also with broidered work, and shod you with badger skins, and I girded you about with fine linen, and I covered you with silk. I decked you also with ornaments, and I put bracelets upon your hands, and a chain on your neck, and I put a jewel on your forehead, and earrings in your ears, and a beautiful crown upon your head. Thus were you decked with gold and silver, and your raiment was of fine silk and linen, embroidered work. You ate fine flour and honey and oil, and you were exceeding beautiful, and you did prosper into a kingdom. And your renown went forth among the heathen for your beauty, for it was perfect through my comeliness, which I had put upon you, saith the Lord. He loved, blessed, protected, and nurtured Israel. But they forgot that they owed everything to him. They became lustful for the things of the world and broke God's heart. And the chapter continues. But you trusted in your own beauty and played the harlot because of your renown, and poured out your fornications on everyone that passed by. His it was. And of your garments you did take, and decked your high places with divers colours, and played the harlot thereupon. The like thing shall not come, neither shall it be so. You've also taken your fair jewels of my gold and of my silver which I had given you, and made to yourself images of men, and did commit whoredom with them, and took your broidered garments and covered them. And you have set my oil and my incense before them. My meat also which I gave you, fine flour and oil and honey, wherewith I fed you, you have even set it before them for a sweet savour. And thus it was, saith the Lord God. Moreover, you've taken your sons and your daughters, whom you have borne unto me, and these have you sacrificed unto them to be devoured. Is this of your whoredoms a small matter, that you have slain my children and delivered them to cause them to pass through the fire for them? And in all your abominations and your whoredoms, you've not remembered the days of your youth, when you were naked and bare, and were polluted in your blood.